Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sarah Tomolsky. I'm a project manager at Sustainable Projects SPRO. And we're all here today for a workshop from CrossGov on fisheries and biodiversity conservation. And we're going to be looking at the question, is policy coherence in the Mediterranean possible? So just a heads up, we are recording. You probably saw the notice flash across your screen. So we will only be recording the plenary session here. So we do not, your face should not show up on the screen, but if you do not want to be shown at all, please do turn off your camera. The discussion rounds will not be recorded. So our plan for today. So first you're going to hear from me, a little word from CrossGov. As I mentioned, we are the ones hosting this workshop. We're then going to start to dive into the content. So first we're going to go to Jonas from University of Eastern Finland. He's going to give us some insights into the legal framework of fisheries management and biodiversity conservation. Then we're going to zoom towards Southern Europe and first look at the Mediterranean policy landscape as a whole with Sasho. And then dive into 3 different case studies in the Med. So looking at fisheries and biodiversity conservation, policy coherence, first in the Northern Adriatic with Ginevra, then in the French Mediterranean with Laura, and then finally in the Torre Guaceto MPA with Moses. So after we've gotten insights from our experts and researchers here today, then we really want to hear from you. So this is meant as an interactive exercise and a workshop to hear about your experiences and also explore best practices. And yeah, to get insights from you on how we can also work towards coherence in this area. So we will then be splitting into 3 breakout groups before closing in plenary and sharing some of our findings from the groups. So just a couple of words about CrossGov. So in CrossGov, we take the Green Deal as our starting point, and more recently also the Oceans Pact. So I think we're also all very familiar with the Green Deal, but it's really a set of quite ambitious goals, from zero pollution to preserving and restoring biodiversity to achieving climate neutrality. And we really ask the question, if a win-win-win is possible for all, can we achieve these goals simultaneously, or do we need to make trade-offs and prioritizations in terms of which goals we can achieve and maybe which ones we also come up short on? So why is there incoherence? In CrossGov, we look at 3 main factors which we have identified. The first is governance structures. The second is science policy interfaces. And the third is stakeholder engagement. So in terms of governance structures, we look at questions of the competencies for fishery policies lies one place at the EU, but maybe the competency for biodiversity policies lie at another level of government. So what impact does this have on policy coherence? And this also plays into stakeholder involvement. Do we see power dynamics at play here? I think you guys mostly have an idea of that. What role does this then play in coherence? Is one stakeholder group more represented? Does this mean that some priorities are above others? And then finally, the last point we look at is the science policy interface. So are we doing evidence-based policy making? Is there data fragmentation, which is also leading to incoherence? Now, before I hand over to Jonas, just our starting point in terms of fisheries. As we know, fisheries are important economic industry in the EU, also a source of employment, but also a very important cultural aspect, especially when we look at the Med, even the Baltic or the North Sea. The cultural importance of fisheries cannot be understated. At the same time, we struggle. Our oceans and seas are struggling, so we're struggling from overfishing, illegal fishing, and climate change. So our question is really, how can we create sustainable fisheries so we can preserve our cultural heritage and employment, but also protect our seas. So with this, I will hand over to Jonas to give us a bit more background into the European framework.
Thank you, Sarah. Um, yes, I've been working with CrossGov for over 2 years, and I did uh, policy coherence analysis on an EU level. So we will start with short introduction to the different policies that are interesting here, and then share a little bit of the conclusions that we had on the EU level policy coherence analysis. So in CrossGov, we are looking at different clusters of policies and try to analyze the coherence between them. And one of them is the biodiversity cluster. And the biodiversity is affected both, of course, by policies that are here to protect the environment, such as the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. But then we also have other policies that are perhaps more into the economic interest, and in this case, the common fisheries policy is especially interesting. So analyze coherence between them, the key is to identify how the policies deal with incoherence tensions and identify how they are aligned and whether there is instruments to create trade-offs between the policies or perhaps even enhance synergies, because that is key to see that there is coherence, that there is interaction between the different policies and that they are trying to go towards the same objectives, that they are trying to achieve the same thing. And if they're not, there is an idea on how to solve this. And fisheries related policies, they have to take into account environmental considerations. And for fisheries, of course, biodiversity is key here. How we fish, where we fish, and so on is super important to if we are going to achieve biodiversity or maintain biodiversity. And if we look at marine biodiversity, fishery is perhaps the biggest impact of all the different um, pressures. So we have this cluster of policies. Three of them are focused on environmental conservation, and then we have the common fisheries policy. The common fisheries policy has a long, long history. It is dating back to early EU days, and it was formalized in the early 80s. And the focus has always been on economic aspects and in somewhat aspects on society as well. So it has been about managing a resource and also being regulating the markets and financially supporting um, the fisheries. So the focus has been on the social and economic aspects mainly, and then we can see that we have during the last decades having more and more focused on environmental protection. And here we can see that habitats is a big thing for us. And what we could see in our results was that for the common fisheries policies, there was a real inner core. The inner core, of course, being the focus on economic and society, and that has been a structure that has been built on for many years. And then you have added kind of an outer logic to it with environmental objectives, where these have been kind of added to an already existing structure, which has made it very hard for it to actually be able to get results to it, to reach those objectives based on the common fisheries policy. The idea of that has just been added on. And that can be seen in different decisions and also how you prioritize the objectives. And then we can see that we have a lot of different instruments in the common fisheries policies. And this has to do with financing, of course, what kind of methods you can use for fishing. But if we look at the environmental part, we can see that it's mainly Article 11, which deals with MPAs connected to the Habitats Directive, the Birds Directive, and Marine Strategy Framework Directive. And that has been in place for many years now, and that is based on member states being able to put measures in these marine protected areas to ensure that they are successful and protection is reached. While doing that for your own flagships is kind of an easy process in many ways. Doing that for other member states in that marine protected area is a much more difficult process that involves member states putting in joint recommendations to the European Commission. But we can see now that we've had this process in place for years now, that it has been deemed complicated, it's lengthy, and it also leads to weak restrictions, which makes them very ineffective. And we can see that uh, does not help the coherence between the policies. Uh, we can also see that there is member states don't have to actually submit these recommendations unless they want to, and we can also see that if they do, the Commission doesn't have to approve them and implement them, which also leads that to a relationship between the policies that is weaker. There is no force behind it. And what we can see that we've been trying to do now is to put in the EU action plan for fisheries and biodiversity. And there is big hopes on that achieving results. What is always hard with these action plans that are not legally binding, it's in this sort of analysis, it's really hard to see what kind of results they will achieve since they are not legally binding. But it's of course a tool that is more of a soft law tool that can achieve results, and we're of course hoping that they are going to achieve results. And for this, we are going to go further to other more concrete examples on this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jonas, for giving, yes, an introduction to the CFP and also the challenges with regards to Article 11. I think the inner core, as you mentioned, of the economic tradition of CFP, and then trying to add this outer logic, a very interesting concept, and I also challenges for future coherence. So now I will hand over to Sasha. So we will move down to the Mediterranean. And Sasha, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So thanks for having me. And as Sarah said, I'll talk about the Mediterranean as a whole, which is, as you probably know, one of the global biodiversity hotspots in terms of biodiversity, but it's also one of the most anthropogenically used seas on the planet, with being the #1 tourist destination in the world, with having major shipping routes going between the Gibraltar and Suez, with fishing industry supporting millions of people around the basin with seafoods. And it has been anthropogenically highly used since the first human civilizations, for the past 12,000 years. And all of these anthropogenic pressures on the environment, combined with climate change that Sarah has mentioned before, where the Mediterranean is warming and acidifying faster than the global averages, and with a lot of invasive species coming in through the Suez Canal, the resilience of the ecosystem is degrading. Therefore, we need to see how can we address these challenges, particularly since they are transboundary in nature and no single state can address them. And this is a challenge in the Mediterranean, especially because it is also quite socially, economically, and culturally diverse, with 22 coastal states spanning from Western Europe across the Balkans, Turkey, and Middle East, and all across Northern Africa. Only 8 of these states are EU member states, so only 8 are bound by the legislation that Jonas has outlined just before. 4 more are in accession, so they are slowly aligning their national policy frames with the EU one, while the rest are completely outside of it. So there will be some added layers of governance and added complexity when describing the policy situation and coherence in the Mediterranean. And then if you look where we are right now in terms of biodiversity and policies, so we can refer to the Mediterranean State of the Environment and Development Report, which firstly underlies the importance of the area for biodiversity. So the Mediterranean holds about 18% of all known marine species in only 0.3% of the ocean volume. And it has the highest rate of endemic species in the world. But at the same time, it is it has experienced quite drastic declines of biodiversity. So the Posidonia meadows are down 30%. The marine predators have declined dramatically, and only less than 10% of the Mediterranean is currently protected, with an estimation that only about 10% of those protected areas have management plans in place. And in considering that, the fisheries are still one of the main pressures on the marine biodiversity. And here we can then refer to the State of the Fisheries report from the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean and the Black Seas, which mentions that only about half of the commercial stocks are assessed, but we can still see that almost 60% of the commercial stocks are fished outside of the biologically sustainable limits, with the average fishing pressure being twice the amount of what would be considered sustainable. Even so, there has been quite notable decreases of the overfishing in the last few years, but still the situation remains quite dire, and it needs to be addressed on the international level. So, so what do we have then in terms of policies? So if you start at the global and the EU level, I will not go into too much detail because Jonas has already outlined it, but just mentioning that on the global level, there is also the global biodiversity framework that the EU policies have integrated and in some ways went beyond them. But again, those only cover 8 out of the 22 states around the Med. Then in terms of fisheries, we have the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean and the Black Seas, or GFCM. They manage all fisheries, all commercial fish stocks in the basin, apart from tuna and tuna-like species, which are managed by ICCAT, or the International Commission for Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. Both of these two organizations are working directly with the EU as well, and their recommendations are translated into the Common Fisheries Policies Acts, but they are international independent organizations beyond the EU law. And then on the biodiversity side, we have the Regional Sea Convention, which in the Mediterranean is the Barcelona Convention, which is managed through the Mediterranean Action Plan. So Barcelona Convention will cover the entirety of the environmental policies, including the biodiversity policies, and the Barcelona Convention then works through a number of regional activity centers. So the biodiversity one, the one that is relevant here, is the SPARAC, or the Specially Protected Area Regional Activity Center. And all of these institutions that interact with each other, they all pass their own policies. And the interactions between them look a little bit like this. This is a very simplified diagram, and I will not go into all of the interlinkages, but I just want you to note two things. One is that ICCAT, so the Tuna Fishery Commission, stands slightly apart. It does interact with the EU, it does interact with the regional institutions, but it stands largely apart and is very effective in what they do, partly because the bluefin tunas are of such high commercial value and there are so many economic vested interests that there is enough money for enforcement. And then the rest of the institutions, they do work together. So there is all of the kind of overarching strategic policy documents in the Mediterranean are largely aligned, showing that there is at least high-level coherence, which is great. The problem is when we go a layer down into the implementation, where this high-level coherence starts falling apart a bit, partly because the Mediterranean is geopolitically really complex. So we have countries that are quite rich, or the richest in the world, like Monaco on one end, and then some of the poorest countries on the other. We have countries that are going through or recently went through civil unrest, or there are even active war zones in the region. Additionally, there is a persistent lack of funding in general and a lack of political will to implement all of these different policies. And the last problem, which is also still quite important, is that despite this high-level coherence, the sectoral silos persist when we implement these policies. So the fishery decisions will still largely be done only with fishery scientists and fisheries competent institutions on one end, and the environmental policies will be done in their own silo with the environmental competent authorities engaging mainly with the Regional Sea Convention, which leads to the position where we have species that all of the Mediterranean countries have decided to protect, protected with action plans, with policies, but are still being fished and openly sold in some of the countries and openly sold in the fish markets because the relevant fishery decisions have not been made by the same countries that agreed the protections. Which then leads us to the point of where we can go from here, and I will not pretend that I have the answers here because this is a complex topic that has been worked on for very many years. But there are some elements that point towards possible improvements, some of which were also already mentioned by Jonas. So the first one is in cooperation. So despite the quite complex situation in which the Mediterranean actors are, they are well positioned to cooperate, and they have cooperated really well in the past. There were projects such as the Med Bycatch or the Depredation project, which brought together both the conservation, environmental, and fisheries competent authorities with the local stakeholders to advance on the issues of bycatch and depredation, which threaten biodiversity. There are cooperations like METPAN, the Mediterranean Protected Area Manager Network, which also functions mainly on cooperation agreements and works quite well. On the EU side, Jonas mentioned the Marine Action Plan, and under this plan, there is a new biodiversity and fisheries working group, which brings together fisheries and biodiversity competent authorities from the member states and make them work together. The establishment of this group is quite recent, but it has started functioning, and it might be one of the ways that we can start bridging the sectoral silos at least. And finally, there is the Oceans Pact that Sarah mentioned in the beginning. So it's currently too soon to tell what it will do, apart from its ambition to make the marine policies more coherent. But if it does do that, then it will be also a step into the direction of resolving at least a little bit the issues that we currently have. And with that, I will pass back to Sarah.
Well, thank you very much, Sasha, also for sharing these potential solutions. I think this is a good place to definitely pick up in our discussion as well. Also with the example of ICAD and just adding these layers of complexity in terms of governance and how we can deal with these issues. So now we are going to go even deeper into the Med, looking at 3 EU side case studies. So first we are going to travel to the Northern Adriatic and start with Ginevra. So I'm going to switch the slide. Perfect. You're muted, Ginevra.
Sorry, it was a matter of setting. If I have the control of the slide, I couldn't unmute myself. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes, we hear you. You're good.
Okay, and I also can change these slides. Perfect. Okay, sorry for this. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the previous speakers for their presentations. So yes, here today to present a zoom in on the case study that we did focus on fisheries and biodiversity in the North Adriatic Sea area. Just to have a bit of introduction on the area we are talking about. The Northern Adriatic Sea is a semi-enclosed basin with significant depth and geomorphological variation along its north-south gradient. It also features delta lagoons, wetlands along its coast, and with major rivers arriving in the Northern Adriatic area. These are providing fresh waters and nutrients, making the area very productive. The Northern Adriatic Sea has also a long history of intense fishing, especially with bottom trawling and hydraulic dredging impacting quite significantly the natural stock and the benthic habitats. Indeed, the Northern Adriatic typology of fisheries account for over a third of national landings, as well as the impact that artisanal small-scale fishery have of course, in their significance at the socio-economic level, but as their environmental impacts as well, given the quite wide range of gears and species that they're targeting. So to continue setting a bit the scene of the policies we are talking about, the focus on biodiversity and fisheries in our case study. So in Italy, biodiversity-related policies such as the Water Framework Directive, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, the Habitat and Bird Directive have been transposed at the national level in the legal framework. The competent authority that has been designed is the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, that is supported by regional authorities. As for fisheries, on the other hand, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, Food Sovereignty and Forestry as the competent authority. So here we have a bit of the framework we are talking about. Going a bit into more detail on the governance framework that is characterized by multiple levels, we can go from the supranational level, as already introduced by Jonas and Sasho. We can identify the role of the GFCM, as introduced by Sasho, through its recommendations and regulations, as well as the regulations set by the European Council setting fishing opportunities of certain species, as well as specific plans adopted at the national levels to regulate and manage the fishing of specific gears or species that can be eventually complemented by mechanisms adopted at the subnational level, at the regional or municipal level. So given the complex framework, there are some coordination mechanisms available that can be identified. One of these is the relevant for the Northern Adriatic Sea area is the North Adriatic Fishing District that brings together the regional authorities of the Italian part of the Northern Adriatic Sea, so Veneto, Friuli Venezia Giulia, Emilia Romagna, together with the competent administration of Slovenia and Croatia, but also business and fishing operators of the sectors, to designate together management measures of the sectors that can be implemented and proposed in the area, as well as the role of consortia, especially regarding the management of bivalve species. So the way in which fisheries policies can help, let's say, reaching biodiversity goals is mostly an indirect way in which fisheries policies can try to reduce their impacts they have on the exploitation of resources at sea. And with these slides, I just wanted to give a couple of examples of this, making reference to the National Triennial Program for Fisheries and Aquaculture that is creating at the national level the link between our national planning, our national management of the sector with the policies and plans that are available at the international level. So making reference to the CFP and the reach of the maximum sustainable yield, but also the combating to illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. And then we have the examples of national management plans. The one mainly relevant for our area are the ones on hydraulic dredging and trawling. In these plans, we find examples of measures that aims to limit the impact of fisheries on the resource and try to regulate their management, such as setting catch limits, specifying the characteristic of the hydraulic dredges that can be used, banning the fishing of certain species and regulating the discards, as well as for trawling, setting fishing permits, as well as managing minimum landing size, and so on and so forth. Similarly, and in line with these examples, the ministry annually issues a decree that establishes the summer ban for most of the fisheries, and specifically we have a measure set specifically for the Northern Adriatic area that ban the trawling not only within the 3 nautical miles from the coast, but within the 6 nautical miles from the coast, with the only exception of small scale fisheries in this time period. And lastly, the ministry, in collaboration with local administration and scientific institution, can establish biological protection zones where fisheries is further regulated. And we have a couple of these in our area of interest. Okay, with these slides, I just wanted to provide a couple more examples of opportunities of integration. One is given by the MFAF national program. So in its objectives, it foresees the integration of fisheries and biodiversity objectives. One example that we can mention here is the role of the fisheries local action groups that are funded under the programs. We can find example in our area of the role of these groups in the collaboration with research institutes, NGOs on biodiversity projects, such as the Tartatur project, aimed at the protection of the caretta caretta, promoting the use of selective fishing gear, improving the monitoring of bycatch, promoting programs of education for fishermen, and so on. And also their role in and their contribution to the development of the management plans for the 2 Natura 2000 sites that we have in front of the delta of the river Po. Last but not least, I wanted to mention the important role of the framework directives. So the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and the Maritime Special Planning one, and the related measures that contain, so they contain both objectives and measures specifically aimed at promoting a sustainable management of fisheries. Specifically regarding MSFD, we can refer to descriptor 3 and 6 and related measures in the program of measures. As for the maritime spatial planning, we can refer to specific measures, for example, the one aimed at promoting co-management of marine protected areas and establishing working group, bringing together actors involved in the implementation of maritime spatial planning, MSFD, biodiversity, and fisheries policies to promote a further integration of this. And also the MSP technical committee that is bringing together both, among other ministries, but both the environment ministry and the fisheries one. And also almost coming to an end, with this slide, I wanted to sum up a bit the challenges and solutions that we identified. So going from a clear division of mandates between the 2 ministries and the complex governance framework, the of course intrinsic conflicting nature of the 2 policy streams that we are focusing on, the fisheries on the one hand aiming at extracting resources, the biodiversity one aiming at protecting these resources, to what could be the opportunities of integration between these 2. So coordination mechanisms, as already also mentioned by Sasha at the med level, here with the, within the Northern Adriatic Sea, we can make reference to the Northern Adriatic Fishing District, and the potentialities of the framework directive in bringing together these 2 policies, and some good examples of integration that are already happening at the locally. And with this, I and I give you back the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Ginevra, for the overview of what's going on in the North Adriatic Sea and also giving us a bit more insights into some of the solutions there. So now we are going to move on to the French Mediterranean, where I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Thank you, Sarah. I hope you can see me. And
Yes.
yes, I can see and move the slide, so it's perfect. So thank you, everyone. I have been working on CrossGov for the past 2 years on a case study on the French Mediterranean Sea, and more specifically on the area that you can see on the screen, the red one. I won't come back on every stakes that are in the French Mediterranean Sea, given that Sacho has already given some of the key main biodiversity stakes and economic stakes. But just for the French Mediterranean Sea, about fishery, there are some challenges such as 2% of fish stocks are collapsed and a bit more than 20% are still not recovered. However, professional fishing represents about 500 vessels and 650 sailors, which represent a low part of regional employment, 0.2%. But it still has a strong cultural importance. About the biodiversity stakes, one key important point about the French Mediterranean Sea and the PACA region is that 53% of the shorelines are protected by Natura 2000 and marine protected areas, but only few with restricted fisheries activities. In CrossGov, the question I try to understand and to answer to is, where is there room to actually integrate biodiversity protection within the fishery policy implementation mechanisms? To first answer this question, I try to understand first what is the governance of fisheries. I won't come back. The governance of fisheries that apply to French Mediterranean fishermen are under 5 scales. First, the international one that was very well covered by Sacho, so I won't come back to it, and the common fisheries policy that Jonas also covered. And these two are integrated within the national policies. So under the national scale, some decisions are taken more specifically about scientific research, which species specifically to cover. There is also a strong important role of the Ministry of Environment, which also cover the fishery, the fishery policy. So it's a way also to that there has been an improvement on these national scales recently, given that fishery is covered by someone is making an art piece on my presentation. It's very funny, sorry. But yes, about this national scale. So fishery and ecology are now covered under the same ministry. And finally, there is an important role of professional organization at this scale. But where the implementation mechanism are the most, where they take the most important role is at the regional and local scales, where there is the enforcement of these policies, the fundings, distribution of quotas and licenses. So I try to cover these both scales to understand where could biodiversity protection be integrated. About national scale, the implementation mechanisms that are key are policy drafting and planning documents. In France, fisheries and biodiversity policies are still drafted and designed in silo. What is also understandable because fishery has a different goal, which is to cover, for example, employment development and sectoral competitions. But what was interesting is that there are two planning documents that also apply to the regional scale that where biodiversity and fisheries can actually work together. In France, to implement the Marine Framework Strategy Directive and Marine Spatial Planning, there is one unique document for each maritime basin, which is called the Facet Strategic Documents. And in this document, one, for example, for the French Mediterranean Sea, it has a program of measure to apply the strategy, French strategic vision of the sea. And it is divided under two big chapters. The first one to apply MSFD is cover biodiversity challenges and biodiversity measures. And the second part of this program of measure cover sustainable fisheries industry. And in this very specific document, there is about 20 measures in the French Mediterranean to cover biodiversity challenges and around 10 for fishery. And the fact that they are in the same document demonstrate that there is a way that they want to really try to cover both policies and stakes in the same under the same strategy. The second planning document is the MFAF action plan. MFAF has always been about economic development, but since 2022, there is also the will to cover biodiversity protection under a high level. And among the 8 key objectives of this program of measure of MFAF, there is now one objective that is dedicated to biodiversity, strictly biodiversity, funding biodiversity measures. Under 2 hats, the first one is it lets each region, each maritime basin decide to support either awareness raising in marine protected areas or to fund action to limit plastic from ships and ghost nets. The second scale where I try to understand where biodiversity protection could be integrated is the regional and local scale. And here it's very important because it's where fundings and regulations are implemented. So I try to understand if we have regulatory mechanisms that apply to fishery funding mechanism, how can it be interlinked and how is it actually interlinked with biodiversity protection? So of course, in the regulatory mechanism, they are the ones that are related to the common fishery policies, such as licenses, quota, landing obligations, that are meant to achieve sustainable fish stocks. Under MFAF funding, there are also by business creation, productive investments, modernizing engines, but where I try to focus is where there is this biodiversity protection that is integrated. And when we mix, when we try to focus on the regulatory mechanism and biodiversity protection, 2 mechanisms were risen. The first one is the possibility to ban and under fishing periods, under time periods, some fishing techniques such as trawling. And there are 2 areas in the French Mediterranean Sea where it's actually possible to, where it's implemented, and it had a very positive effect given that, for example, hake stock that were collapsed rose from 54% in a few years. And I won't come back under the funding, MFAF funding and biodiversity integration, but it's related to the 2 key possibility that I showed earlier, that I explained earlier. So just one last word about the solutions that I found in this case study. It's not complete, it's just 2, 3 elements that really struck me is that mutually supporting measures between fishery and biodiversity in plants are actually quite effective because it kind of force these plans, but also institutions, to work together to implement these measures, and it's a way to move forward towards better coherence. The second solution could be to have these targeted fishery bans, which are quite effective, even if it's in small areas. And it could be interesting to also implement them more efficiently into marine protected areas, which are not where fishery is still allowed today. And finally, the last one is to add environmental conditionality and effective criteria to the award of MFAF grants, to be sure that even if it's about business and employment creation, that there is this biodiversity protection that is being integrated. Thank you, and I give back the floor to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, Laura, for giving us the perspective of the French Med and also the importance of going beyond these governmental silos and the power that we can create coherence when we do work together. I think that's also good food for thought for our breakout group sessions. So now, before we do go into the breakout groups, we have our final insights from Moses, who's going to be taking us to the Torre Guaceto MPA in southern Italy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Yeah, so moving from we are moving from a more regional discussion from international and regional discussions to a more local level case study, and this is actually a case which focuses on sustainable fisheries on Italian marine protected areas, and I'm actually focusing on one MPA which is called Torre Guaceto in Italy. And this is actually part of an EU-funded project, which is called PermaGov. So I'll just give a brief about PermaGov before I continue. Yeah, okay. Sorry, okay. Yeah, so PermaGov seeks to also it's also linked to the EU Green Deal. So it seeks to improve European EU marine governance through two main ways. One is to develop a framework to assess EU marine governance, looking at the institutional barriers, the collaboration dynamics, the role of e-governance. And the next one is to co-produce a solution or a strategy to help address the various challenges that we identified through the assessment. And I don't know, okay, yeah. So PermaGov also, within the marine domain, we have categorized our cases under 4 key areas. So we are looking at maritime transport, marine energy, marine plastics, and also marine life. And it is under the marine life case where we focus on sustainable fisheries in Italian marine protected areas. And this is also linked to the EU Green Deal of sustainable food system and also biodiversity conservation. So, so just a bit about the importance of fisheries, as we've already heard. So the fisheries sector is very important, and within the Mediterranean region, or the countries within the Mediterranean are considered some of the highest fish consumers in the EU. And apart from that, it also serves as a source of employment and has an important cultural aspect as well. But as you've already heard, there are also challenges of overfishing, illegal fishing activities, and also climate change. So one of the key tools to help address some of these challenges is marine protected areas. But then we also know that MPAs also have challenges, because if there is a protection, if there is a restriction in the use of the marine space, then actors or marine users such as fishers are likely to also be impacted. So what we seek to do in this case is to examine how, for instance, co-management of the marine protected area and also the fisheries could help address some of these challenges and the multiple needs of the stakeholders involved. So that is the main focus of the study, and it's also contribute to the discussions on how MPA governance can help deliver both environmental and also the livelihood sustainability of fisheries. So just a bit about Torre Guaceto NPA. So it was established in 1991, but during that time, it was more considered as a paper pack because there wasn't very strict enforcement of regulations. But if you look at the map, you can see that there are three main zones. We have Zone A, B, and C, which looks at the different levels of protection of the NPA. So Zone A is more like the generally restricted area where no economic activity like fishing is allowed. But then they also have Zone B where they allow for some scientific analysis or scientific analysis, and also Zone C where fishing is allowed to some level. So there are some regulations for fishing. For instance, in Torre Guaceto, fishermen are allowed to fish once a week within the NPA, within the zone. But in the year 2000, a management consortium was actually established, consisting of officials from the two main municipalities, which is Brindisi and Caravigno, and then also WWF. So the three bodies came together to form this consortium, and they imposed a 4-year ban on the use of the NPA. So fishing was banned within the period. And there were a lot of challenges because the fishermen at that time and also other users were not happy. So there were a lot of conflict until 2005 when the ban was partially lifted. And this created this kind of relationship because the fishermen, after the ban, realized that they were getting more catch, they were getting more benefits from the fisheries. And it has been the case that this NPA and the fishers have been in this constant interaction until now, and the NPA is now considered one of the most success stories NPAs within Italy, but also in the Mediterranean region. So just a bit about some of the key good practices that exist in the NPA that maybe could be learned for other NPAs. So one key thing that I found from the study, or we found from the study, is that the strong commitment of the NPA Management Consortium to make fisheries part of the larger socio-ecological system of the NPA. So fishers are considered very key actors in taking decisions within the NPA, even though the co-management system is more informal because it is just through the constant interaction between the NPA manager, especially, and the fishers, because the fishers are just about 10 within the NPA who are allowed to fish. So they have this informal contacts to exchange ideas, and through that they've been able to build this strong connection and to be able to have a common understanding on how to protect the NPA. And this has been a very key driver of the success of the NPA. Another another key thing is the economic benefits and compensations that these fishers also receive for engaging in conservation schemes. So for instance, they get direct payments for engaging in some of these conservation schemes, and also through the increased catch. So when there is, for instance, a ban on fishing for a period and they come back, they get a lot of catch and also bigger fish. So through that, they are able to also benefit directly from engaging in conservation activities. And another key thing that is also very good for the NPA is this labeling of fish that is caught in the NPA. So there is slow food logo, which is put on fishes that are caught within the NPA, and that gives them some sort of credibility as also a fish that is coming from a well-conserved NPA. And because of that, they get higher prices for their fish, and that is good for the fishermen as well. So it's more like win-win situation where the NPA conservation target is being reached, but also fishers are also benefiting from it. And aside that, one of the key challenges that we found was the informality of the co-management system. So as I indicated, it is more of an informal interaction between the NPA manager, who sees this as very important for the sustainability of the NPA and also the fisheries. But this is something that is very difficult, can be very challenging for the fishers, because their participation in co-management process actually depends on the goodwill of the NPA manager. So today or tomorrow, if they have a new NPA manager, such interactions may not exist, and it could negatively affect the sustainability of the co-management system itself. Another one is the issue of actors' roles and responsibilities. So just like the fishermen, the NPA manager also does not really have a legal backing to really for instance, punish offenders for going against the regulations or the agreed terms with the fishers. So what they do is to resort to what they call moral suasion, where fishermen are allowed to sign some things on paper to agree with the MPA to abide by the regulations. But if they don't, there is no really any legal backing for the MPA to really punish offenders. And also the issue of scale of institutions. So there's this mismatch between the powers. So at the national level, it is the Ministry of Environment that actually implements most of the policies or that set the regulations and also ensures compliance. But the local level, all they do is to make sure that they implement those regulations or those things. And it's this mismatch because the MPA does not really have power. For instance, they mentioned that they had a plan to expand the MPA. They sent a proposal to the Ministry of Environment, but as of now, there has not been any approval. And because of that, they've not been able to implement this expansion project. So that is one of the challenges with this kind of unequal or mismatch between the powers at the local and also the national level. But some of the key observations that we observe from also the Italian context in general is that kind of institutional fragmentation, because there's no single way of managing the MPA. Each MPA has its own way of managing their system. And also the power imbalances between the actors is one of the key observations. And also the formal-informal dynamics. So we see that the MPA is managed informally between the fishers and also the MPA management. But as to whether this informality is something that should be encouraged or not is also a question of debate, because now we see the MPA working well. But if the situation changes, maybe it might not be the same story. And one other key thing is the trust building among the stakeholders. So we see that the trust building is very crucial, but also it's context specific, because this is a very small MPA with few actors. But in a situation where we have very big MPA with different actors and different interests, the situation may be different. So that is also one thing that we need to take note. And finally, we see that showing the benefits of conservation is very crucial for enhancing also the sustainability or the partnership between fishers and also MPA management. So that is one of the key things, that if fishers do not see the benefits of engaging in conservation, then there will be challenges with policies like MPAs to be implemented at the local level. So with this, I will end, and thank you very much for the time.
Great, thank you so much, Moses, also for showing us, more local case of co-management and how it can be a win-win for all, but also the challenges of scaling that given our institutional frameworks and multiple level of governance and silos, which we've already heard about through the other presentations. So now we are going to be moving into the breakout sessions. It's just about 11:30, so we're only a little bit behind schedule. We're going to be having 3 breakout sessions on tools, governance, and stakeholder engagement. So the first one on available tools will look at the question, what tools do we have to contribute to both sustainable fishing and biodiversity conservation? And this group will be moderated by Ginevra. Our second group, governance, will look at how can different ministries and government bodies ensure better alignment and coordination. And this group will be moderated by Sasho. And then we will have the third group on stakeholder engagement, looking at the question, what stakeholder engagement mechanisms, financial or legal tools exist to effectively bring together fishery and conservation stakeholders. And this group will be moderated by Laura. So we have time for a short conversation. It'll probably about 20, 23, 25 minutes. So we'll come back to the plenary with about 7 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of the moderators to nominate a repertoire for their group or ask for a repertoire to volunteer, who can then also, again in plenary, give 2 key discussion points or findings or solutions from your breakout groups. In a minute, you're going to have the choice of group, so it will pop up on your screen and you can choose which one you want to join. If you have any IT issues, you have the ability to come back to the plenary by toggling to the bottom of your screen. If we have big imbalances between the groups, I may also come in and ask some people to switch. But so yes, now for the next 20 minutes, we're off to the group. So the Konstantinos, you can make the box pop up now, and then we'll see everybody in a bit. you guys, first of all, had interesting discussions with some interesting points raised. So we'll just do a quick tour de table to hear, the 3 main takeaways from each of the groups. So I'll first start with the tools group.
It will be me, Sarah, to summarize in a few points. I mean, we stressed that when we look at MPAs and the way they can have in, providing conservation of biodiversity, it's very important we consider both their expansion as required by the EU strategies on biodiversity conservation, but also to the more effective management of existing and future one. Very important also for the future one when we look at expansion. This links to a major challenge in the Mediterranean, which is lack of fund and capacity to implement the measures and to monitor, which indeed affect all the measures that fishery and biodiversity can put in place to reduce the impact of the first and the second measures, which are spatially based, area-based management tools, or regularly based. I mean, they need implementation, enforcement, monitoring, and adaptation. It's also very important that there is a lack of concrete instruments to fine or to punish those that are making infractions, even if they are monitored and discovered. And then we stress the fact that directive like MSP and MSFD can provide a large common framework to support the sectors discussing and providing common solutions, and that's the case also for fisheries and biodiversity. But on top of all, what is very important, and where again this directive can play a role, is to enable an open and transparent dialogue between the different actors, and recognize that fishermen are allied in biodiversity conservation and in the sustainable resource management. Just to conclude, it was also pointed out that another important driver will be the implementation of the restoration law through the restoration plans, and again, how to effectively improve the current status of different habitats, which have a lot of reflections also, a lot of effects also on the habitat for commercial important species and therefore for fisheries.
Great. Thank you very much, Emiliano. It sounds like it was a very good discussion. So thank you for sharing the concise summary. So now I would move on to the governance group.
Yeah, I've been nominated to do it. We tried to get Paulina to do it the same as Emiliano, but she said she didn't take notes. So I have to do it. But in any case, it was a nice discussion, which went a bit also beyond the questions, but it was something that was discussed quite a lot, was the stakeholder engagement at different governance levels or across governance levels, since that are, well, I mean, obviously there's conflict between different sectors, but often also the responsible bodies do not even know that their objectives are not aligned, speaking different language, not different languages as actual languages, but the terminology used or the way they express themselves is different, and they can speak past each other. And this then also extends to aquaculture sector and the interactions with policies such as the EIAs that we haven't really discussed today, but there's other case studies in CrossGov that deal with them. And there was some discussion of some good practices, like something that Laura discussed a bit in her presentation in France, when there is some aligning in implementation documents between different policies, has been pointed out as a good way to go for further. And there is a lot of different fora for discussing these topics, also at the level of the Met, with the issue being that they are often still quite sectorally dominated. So there are advisory councils which are fisheries with some members of civil society and environmental organizations, but the sectoral fishery logic prevails. Or there are meetings organized through the General Fishery Commission for the Mediterranean, but then again, the experts are often more nationally delegated, and again, it goes through the FAO or the fisheries focal points often. So that was mainly it, but if I missed something important, anyone else can jump in quickly.
Well, great. Thank you, Sasha, for the wrap up. Then the third final group, stakeholder engagement.
In the stakeholder engagement group, we had a very interesting discussion. So we talked both about some tools, management tools, and challenges. So for the tools, we talked about the eco labeling, so which encourages maybe better fishing practices, as well as adding market value to the products. We also mentioned some stakeholders. So for instance, in France, we have the Direction départementale des territoires and the Prud'homme. So they can help the local fishermen implementing new fishing techniques, for instance. And as for the challenges, so apparently it's hard to find experts in both biodiversity, but that can also secure financial funds. It also requires for MPS to fill a lot of paperwork, so a lot of administrative tasks. Yeah, I think that's. Oh yeah, and also sometimes it's hard to engage dialogue with the fishermen because maybe of mistrust towards the authorities or a fear of losing autonomy. I don't know if there is other things to add.
Great. Thank you, Felix, for
Thank you.
volunteering also to present. And thank you guys all for your discussions. We do have notes of the discussion, so we'll be providing summaries afterwards also if you'd like to look into the other points. As we are at about 12, this brings us also to the end of our workshop. So we do have upcoming webinars also within CrossGov on different topics. So one on offshore wind and biodiversity protection on May 12th, and one on policy coherence from source to sea with regards to pollution on May 14th. So if you liked this one and are maybe interested in some other marine related topics, please feel free to register. If you want any more in-depth information on what was presented today, a lot of these findings are backed up by research that all of the people who you heard spoke have been working on for the last couple of years. So please feel free to reach out to us. We can put you in touch with the speakers. And yes, thank you very much for joining and have a nice lunch and the rest of your day.